Hello everyone, welcome to Innovation Road Studio. I'm your host Rukesh and today I'm really happy to have Mr. Rukesh Patel with us, who is the CIO CTO at Edelweiss Financial Services, and we're looking forward for an interesting discussion with him. Welcome, Rukesh. Welcome to our studio.
Thank you very much, Nupur.
Rukesh, we want to know why digital transformation has become so significant, in fact, referred as a necessary disruption.
Interesting question. So, I I believe there are the we as society is very changing, right? So if you take the social order is changing, our preferences are changing, and everybody wants things that are better, cheaper, faster, right? So if you think about better, so the consumer preferences in terms of am I really solving the problems that the customer wants, right? Then in terms of cheaper, everybody is expecting things that are cheaper. Eh, you know it's and we have a problem that is of abundance rather than a problem of scarcity, which we used to have before, right? So like today, for example, before we would take like 24 pictures and that was it. Today we have a sorting problem of photos, right? So so our preferences around how we do what we do is changing. um, then if you think about in terms of we vote with our clicks, right? So how many apps that are there in Play Store? There are like millions, right? How many do we have installed on our phone? Maybe 20, 50 at best, right? And how many do we actively use on daily basis? That's just about five. So there is a shortage, like there is an economy of attention, right? So you know all that is driving disruption. And previously we didn't have the capability to process information as well, but now with cloud and endless amount of compute and all, we can drive things very differently. So things are by inherent getting faster. It is no more about stability and security. It's now about how do I get things faster and very agile. And therefore things like the world itself is just getting so massively disruptive that if you don't continue to keep pace with it, at some point or the other, you know you're going to go out. Like previously we had like maybe every decade one new business model that kind of came up, but today, like in a decade, we have like 10 new different business models that come up. So things are inherently very disruptive in that sense, I think. Yeah.
Yes, if we think about the first step any organization has to take towards digital transformation, what it should
I think you have to first aim for and identify who the customers are. Without customer knowing what they are, you know, what they want, why they want what they want, how they want, and sometimes customer also don't know. There are stories about that as well. But knowing what the customer really wants is the key, and then then everything else kind of follows through in terms of the steps. But I think it has to start with customers, and like the disciplines of design thinking, and there are various literature about all of that. But keeping customer as the center, I think that's the key.
start with the customer.
Yeah. Without that, I think, yeah.
So which is how to identify if we are ready for a technological change or a digital transformation as an organization.
The revenues are stifling, right? Costs are escalating. Um, the competitors are kind of encroaching the space. Um, you know, I mean, you don't want it to get to that before you realize you need to transform, right? Because by then it's probably too late. And it's like a big ship. How do you steer it? Not possible to steer a big ship very quickly unless it's a very agile organization. So you know, yeah,
I agree that
yeah, yeah,
indicate somewhere.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there may be others, but I think these are the main ones. I mean, you have to focus on the numbers and all, as a business. I mean, you're there for profit. So, at some point or the other, that makes sense. But then there are other parameters that kind of shows.
Digital transformation is mistaken to be technological only. Can you highlight the cultural or the operational or the organizational aspect of it?
Oh, God. Okay. Yeah. Um, so, digital transformation is not about technology.
Not just about
It's not just about technology, right? And I think many organizations think that, hey, we put in a good technology and it will solve all our problems. It absolutely is not. It's a culture, but it's culture that kind of stems everything. Um, but there are lots of processes to it. So you can get a great technology, but if the people are not using it, the people are not, the whole change management on how you actually adapt it, right? That kind of comes into play. So the organizational elements around, is there an ownership? Is there a buy-in? Is there a drive? Is it just is there a real need for it? And is it, is it fulfilling the user's need, right? And the customer's need? And how does that organization come across and addresses all those layers? That's the key. I mean, putting a technology, I think, is the simplest part, but it's identifying the processes that needs to be changed, identifying who are going to own what processes, and within that process what kind of transformation that needs to happen, and being able to articulate those transformations, being able to articulate those requirements. And then the technology kind of comes in, and yes, okay, technology can then tremendously help. But it's that articulation problem, and we, while that is very vague, nothing is going to get solved by the technology.
technology alone can't.
It can't. Yeah, exactly.
Rukesh, how to create a digital roadmap for a business?
See, at Edelweiss, along with Nitin, who is our group CIO, um, we have come up with a blueprint. And what we are talking about in terms of what the roadmap for the digital transformation should be is, moving away from projects mindset and getting into a platform mindset, moving away from measuring time and cost and budgets and that, to business value and business outcomes, right? How do you get into a continuous improvement? And because it's a lifetime of it, it's not just a fixed start and a stop date, right? So it has to be a continuous improvement process that continues to add value. And we've defined three dimensions to it, to the platform strategy, and we said, okay, these are the three essential ingredients that make up of a platform strategy in terms of the business roadmap and how the technology kind of helps the business. First one is the data, APIs, and digitalization. So if I quickly drill down into each one, so data is the, you know it's absolutely essential. Having data for each and everything. It's about how do we store data, how do we share data, how do we report from data, how do we govern data, right? And without data, it's like, I think every organization is going to need data. Without data, you know like the future, when we start talking about AI and ML and all, this is the DNA on which it kind of rests, right? And the shifting the culture of the organization to be a data driven culture, more experiments driven based on data and matrices, right? So that's on the data side. The APIs is building cleaner interfaces between every system. Um, when there are two or three systems talking to each other, they are always talking via APIs, and making these APIs as generic as possible, as externalizable as possible. And we put together our own API gateway that allows us to kind of externalize a lot of our systems, abstract a lot of the complexity behind each, and therefore APIs kind of abstract the the implementation detail of how the system operates. So later on, you can take in another system, put in another system, as long as the API and the contracts don't change for everybody and nobody's directly talking to the system, it works beautifully. So that's the intention there. And lastly, it's about, and this is where the business kind of comes into play. Where do you do digitization or digitalization, right? So digitization is about taking an existing process and digitizing it, right? Very much like, if you think about like NEFT, RTGS, it's taking the existing check clearing process and digitizing that, right? As opposed to digitalization, which is more about really transforming the way in it works. This is where the design thinking comes in, both top down and bottom up. And an example of that is like UPI, right? So altogether rethink of how the payment should work, and everything happens instantaneously, right? If you don't receive your money, you get the refund immediately. Um, so so are are there processes? Are you going to digitize them or are you going to digitalize them? Right? And very simply to look at it is, the examples that we give is about, you have a caterpillar. Do you want to make a faster caterpillar or do you want to transform it into a butterfly? Right? So, you know, there's a saying there, and I think you'll remember that, which is, the most inefficient task is to uh, do efficiently the tasks that are not required at all, right? So that's where, like, these three things kind of build the foundation around the whole business transformation and the digital transformation sort of thing.
So, what would be your key learnings, or what are your key learnings undergoing digital transformation?
Um, the biggest one would have to be, um, there has to be a business ownership. There has to be a business sponsor. There has to be a need for it, for whatever you're doing. It cannot be a transformation for transformation's sake. Um, I think the change management comes very deeply as well in our organization. Taking the whole organization through the change management on whatever you are going to transform, the buy-in, and getting the whole organization rallied behind the change and they understanding why that change is required. Um, those are the things that we grapple with quite often.
Rukesh, my last question to you would be, why digital transformation will fail?
Why would the digital transformation fail? I mean, apart from the obvious things, which is like, there's no leadership buy-in, people are just doing for the sake of, doing the transformation. I think, um, you know, when we look at it as a project, right? We say, hey, we're going to transform this for a, and we start a journey, and at some point we say, yeah, okay, we are transformed. Digital transformation is never like that because the world is constantly changing. The external environment, both as well as the internal environments are changing. And therefore, a transformation has to have a continuous improvement. And that is the key to it. How do you continue to adapt? And how do you continue to improve the processes that you've built? And how do you build that organization which allows for continuous improvement? Right? And and if that piece is done right, and the DNA and the whole organization is working through the ability to continue to improve, then any kind of transformation has got much more agility to it, much more responsive to it. Because I don't believe that digital transformation is a stop and start process. It has to be a continuous process until you exist, or until whatever that product is exists.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
your
My pleasure.
thoughts with us. Thank you, Steve. Pleasure to have you
Likewise.
having this discussion with us. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.